Hey everyone. Now, I recently watched a podcast with Joe Rogan and a guy named Bret Weinstein. Bret Weinstein is a biologist and an evolutionary theorist. Now, the reason I'm doing this podcast because when I watched that Joe Rogan podcast when he sits down with Bret Weinstein and they start talking about certain things, there were some things I felt that Bret Weinstein conveyed that were very wrong on scientific points that he tried to make that have no basis. So, the reason why I'm doing this podcast is just to clarify some things because it stuck out to me and it didn't sit right with the things that were presented as facts when they were misleading. So, it's not Joe Rogan's fault. He is not a biologist, but Bret Weinstein should have known better because he is a world-renowned biologist, so he should know better. Now, just to give you a little background, so Bret Weinstein, he received his doctorate in 2009 from the University of Michigan. Now, he claims to be from an informal group known as the Intellectual Dark Web. It's a political group, but an informal group of political commentators against political correctness, and what they see is a very polarized political view in the media circles. So they're against this polarization of political correctness in the media. Now, so I'm just giving that little bit of information on Bret Weinstein. Now, to get into what was discussed on that podcast, he talked about telomeres, and he made some incorrect claims. Now, before I get into the incorrect claims, I'm going to tell you what telomeres are, because you're probably wondering what the hell is this guy going on about? What the hell's a telomere? No, it's not a T-rug. But let me tell you this, right? So a telomere, I'm going to break it down like this. It is a region of repetitive nucleotide sequences on the end of each chromosome. Now, everyone has, most people have, unless they've got a disorder, they have 23 pairs of chromosomes, which represent 46 chromosomes in total in the human body. Now, some people have less, some people may have more. Conditions can do that, but most people will have 46 chromosomes. Now, the telomere sits at the end of the chromosome, and it protects the end of the chromosome from deterioration and also fusing with neighboring chromosomes. So I hope I haven't lost you there. So the telomere sits at the end of each of these chromosomes, these 46 chromosomes, and prevents them from deterioration and fusing with neighboring chromosomes. Now, what is a telomere actually made up of? It's made up of basic molecules. Now, the basic molecule that represents a telomere is actually made up of 3 subunit molecules. These subunit molecules are nitrogen base, number 1, a 5-carbon sugar base, number 2, and number 3, a phosphate group. So these submolecules, they'll look like chains of strange molecules on paper that are linked up to make a telomere. So when cells divide over time, it's called senescence. So people age, that's what senescence is, right? So when cells divide over time, chromosomes duplicate and they wear down, and the telomere gets shorter and shorter as the process happens, and this is represented in us aging or looking aged. So as we begin to age, our telomeres are getting smaller. Now, what did Bret Weinstein claim? He claimed to Joe Rogan that the telomeres of lab mice are broken. He claimed that his claim was this, right? So his thinking stated that all these mice come from one laboratory called the Jackson Laboratory, and they've all been coming from this one laboratory for the last 40 years, and All the samples of mice used around the world for drug testing and research all come from this one lab, and he claims that the telomeres of these mice are actually longer now than their counterparts in the wild, and that as a result, drug testing is flawed, and when they drug test on mice to determine if those drug tests are suitable for human trials, he's claiming that, well, the telomeres of these mice in the lab are all longer now because they are not in their native environment in the wild, and he claims that this is the reason why telomeres are longer, because the mice are basically in captivity and not in the wild. Now, this is a completely flawed claim. The science doesn't back it up. So there's a strong problem with Bret's claim. He really doesn't understand how telomeres work. Now, laboratory mice have telomeres that are 5 to 10 times longer than in humans, but their lifespan is 30 times shorter. Now, mice can live anywhere between 12 months to 7 years in the lab, depends on their breed, and there's many factors involved. So it is a much more complicated situation than Bret Weinstein leads on. And his paper on this, he actually released a paper in 2002 and was completely rejected. So it's been proven with science that it's just not true, that the lab mice, they have telomeres, that they're not affected by environmental factors. That is not an evolutionary determination. By taking mice out of the wild and putting them in a lab, there is just no evolutionary consequence for the telomeres. So I believe that, the longer telomere claim by Bret Weinstein is flawed, and him saying that the drug testing that goes on by the ADF is flawed. And he gets a lot of things, or there's many points he makes that could be argued that's incorrect. And this is where it stands with this podcast. So it was quite bizarre. So the Weinstein hypothesis is incorrect. There's no evidence that proves Weinstein's hypothesis. We don't see any evidence that there are longer telomeres in decades-old strains of rats in labs. No, it doesn't happen. You got to think of it like this. If they had longer telomeres, then their senescence would decrease. Their aging process would decrease. And we're not seeing mice live for 30 years because, according to Weinstein, these mice are going to live a lot longer. They are living a lot longer because there's no predatory risks for them. They're not getting eaten by stray cats and dogs and wolves and foxes and anything else they may run into in the environment that cuts their life expectancy down. But senescence-wise, they're aging at the same rate. Your lab-grown mice or your mice out in the wild, you compare the two, senescence is still the same. Environmental factors differ and determine a lot in the lifespan of them, but the senescence is still the same. So this paper, you got to understand the hypothesis that Bret Weinstein talks about on the Joe Rogan podcast was proven incorrect. It was all the way back in 2002 where he released his hypothesis, and it's been completely disproven by the scientific community. So keep that in mind. It's easy to get fooled. You see an expert talk about something, but even the experts get it wrong. So that's the point I want to make with this podcast. And never take anything, as gospel. Always do your research. investigate claims people make. Even the experts get it wrong. So that's what I'm saying. So the smartest people on earth will always investigate what they are told. So most people watching this podcast would believe it. They would take Bret Weinstein on his word, and being an expert and all, they wouldn't even contemplate him being incorrect or infactual. But really, you have to look at the evidence yourself, and you have to weigh up what people say and try and determine if they are correct or incorrect, even if they are deemed experts in their field, because this is what differentiates people from just the very intelligent from the intelligent. So you have to really, really look into things and question everything and build your own knowledge base, and then you will grow in knowledge. Anyway, I'm MC Rapology. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. Like this podcast. I know it's a bit of a highbrow podcast today, but I just thought it'd be interesting to stress this message about, fact checking and just correcting some things that were said in this Joe Rogan podcast. Big ups to Joe Rogan, though. He's not a biologist or an evolutionary biologist, so, Anyway, peace.